Good afternoon, everyone. It is 4:30, so I will call this special meeting of Fundy Albert Council for December 23rd, 2024 to order. First order of business is the adoption of the agenda. The agenda for this special meeting of council for December 23rd, 2024 was circulated in advance. I understand there's an interest in adding an agenda item. Based on what I saw, Councillor, I would propose it be called Budget Deliberation Principles, if you're okay with that. So our procedural bylaws require that to have unanimous consent in order for it to be added to the agenda. Is everyone consent to the addition of that to the agenda?
Yes.
Councillor Eldricken?
Yes.
All right, so I would accept a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. So
No
moved by
motion.
Deputy Mayor Arrow, seconded by Councillor Eldricken. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any, the motion's carried unanimously. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? There being none, we'll move on to item number 4, which is year-end financial resolutions. So there are a number of year-end financial resolutions in order to reinvest a number of guaranteed interest certificates, the opening of a new capital bank account for Fundy Albert, and potential transfer of funds from the Fundy Albert General Operating Fund to capital accounts and GICs. So the first one that was circulated is a 2025 GIC reinvestment. The motion is related to existing GICs, and I would need someone to read that motion.
Whereas the current GICs are up for renewal on December 18th, December 18th and 28th of 2024, and whereas be it resolved that the following GICs be cashed out early and reinvested with interest into the cashable GICs.
Councillor Eldricken, I'll have to stop you there. You don't have the most current version, so I would ask someone here to read that. Please go ahead, Councillor Land.
Whereas the current GICs are up for renewal on December 18th and 28th of 2024, and whereas 27,968 is to be withdrawn from GIC 4 to cover the expense of air packs purchased, 35,833.95 cents of GIC 3 was to fund a portion of the Riverside Albert Water Treatment Upgrade Project. Be resolved that the following GICs be cashed out early and reinvested with interest earned into cashflow GICs. GIC 1, 141,938.27 cents from CCBF 2019-2023. GIC number 2, 15,254.27 cents, CCBF 2014 to 2018. GIC number 5, $13,055.14 from the Riverside Albert Capital. GIC 6, $15,265.15, Riverside Albert Capital. GIC 7, $11,667.89, Riverside Albert Recreation Center. GIC 8, $27,000 from HFD. GIC 9, $22,000 from AFD. Be it further resolved that GIC 4, $43,418.04 from RAFD be cashed out early, but only $15,454 and interest earned be invested into the cashflow GIC. Be it further resolved that GIC 3, $35,833.95 Riverside Albert Utility be cashed out for contribution to the Riverside Albert Water Treatment Upgrade.
So moved by Councillor Land. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Coates. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I'm just looking for kind of an explanation because I think I don't really understand what's going on, really. So we have, I don't even understand what really the GICs is. It's a guaranteed investment certificate.
Yeah.
And they're up for renewal. And some of them are being renewed early, it seems, or cashed in early and new ones bought. And they're associated with different items. You know, sometimes it's referred to as the Alma Fire Department or the Hillsborough Fire Department or a Riverside Albert Capital. But what is this money and what's it for?
I'll refer to either the CAO or the treasurer who can respond to that question.
I can address that. So in Riverside, Albert, and it had been pretty much the same since I started. So Canada Community Building Fund, they always put them in a cashable GIC. Don't know why, but they're there. As well as different other capital accounts that were for Riverside, Albert. In the rec center, and last year we had added ones for Hillsborough Fire Department and Alma Fire Department where they hadn't used their budget, and I knew there was more capital purchases they had made. That was my recommendation to put those in a GIC. So GIC is essentially buying, it's like the equivalent of buying a capital asset. So the money has to be used on a capital asset. But it's an easier way to make a temporary account to separate funds.
So I know
More easily.
Just so, hold on. Okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I don't want to jump ahead too much to some of the other resolutions, but what's the difference between a reserve fund or a capital fund and these GICs that we're discussing in this resolution? What's the difference?
So like the GICs, they've already been purchased, so I kind of, in a sense, have to keep on renewing them until they're used on capital purchases, because it's essentially like buying a truck. Once you buy a truck, it's kind of claimed as a capital asset, where a reserve hasn't been essentially used on a capital asset. It's essentially just a reserve.
And I do know that from previous involvement in other businesses that a GIC, if you don't reinvest in a GIC, it becomes revenue in your account that you have to use as revenue right there, right then. If you reinvest, then you can reinvest for a future year on a different project.
But what account would these be? If these were cash, then what account are they coming out of?
If they were cashed?
Well, that what the mayor just said, that if the GIC is cashed in,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a revenue to the account, you said.
Mm-hmm.
So which account?
It would be to the general operating.
That would be to our Fundy Albert Capital Company.
So would the GIC be cashed into the GIC capital account or into the Fundy Albert capital account or
Yeah.
the general revenue?
It would go into our capital.
Okay. So my mistake. Be to a capital account.
So why wouldn't we just do that? Why wouldn't we just, instead of having these GICs all over the place, why don't we just put them all in the capital account?
Probably because of interest earned. Earn
Because
interest on
they wouldn't necessarily all go in the capital account. This is for a good chunk of them. Part of them would have to go into the CCBF accounts. The other three or two of them would have to go into the Riverside Albert capital account. One of them is funded for the Riverside Albert Recreation Center. So those funds come not only from the village of Riverside Albert, but from the LSC of Hopewell and Harvey. So we would have to make a separate bank account for that one. And we'd have to make a separate bank account for the Hillsborough Fire Department and Alma Fire Department. But if we keep them in a GIC, this avoids making the creation of bank accounts that could only be temporary for a short period of time.
I don't know if I'm the only one who, I think I sort of understand it, but I don't really understand it, to be frank. This is why I had asked for it. A map might help me visualize what's going on here, but I know we've been renewing GICs ever since we started Fundy Albert, but I'm not sure we were doing it with in full knowledge of really what's going on.
So for the purposes of today, we do have a resolution in front of us. If you are not comfortable with it, then your option is to vote not to support the resolution. And if you don't support the resolution, then those GICs, the purchases, those GICs will likely mature. And then they just go into whatever account they're destined to go into.
May I speak, Mr. Mayor?
Just hold on. We have Councilor Land who wanted to speak.
In all the GICs, there's none there for Hillsborough. Do they have none? Tony
No.
Fire,
Just the fire department.
that's the only one.
Yeah, like a majority of them are just GICs that have been brought in from Riverside Albert and were reinvested from Riverside Albert.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Treasurer, the treasurer wanted to say something first.
No, it was.
Did you answer? Oh, it was Loretta?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Councilor, go ahead.
Nope, that's okay. And I noticed that this was a procedure that we did in Riverside Albert prior to amalgamation. And part of what was because when we had, and the treasurer can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we had a little bit of leftover, we didn't have enough to do a major project. So we were able to put some aside, hoping to add to it or add this money to something else to finish a project. That's my understanding is why Riverside Albert did it that way in the past. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we never had enough to do a whole project, but if we put it aside and could add to it later or cash it out, it's the same, I think, with the Riverside Albert route utility that we're cashing in. It was money that was set aside in the past, numerous years, in order for the water treatment to go towards the water treatment plant. So this GIC is not unknown to me. But it probably is in the other former villages, I guess.
Okay, so I need to know whether you'll be supporting the resolution, Councilor.
Yeah, I have one more question though. The
Yep, go ahead.
the CCBF, GIC number 1 and number 2, that is
Mhm.
for all of Fundy Albert, or is that for a specific?
That's just the funds that came from the Riverside Albert.
It is Riverside Albert. So is there a reason that it doesn't say Riverside Albert there?
No, it's just because I've left it generic as they're all in a one plan now.
So again, Councilor, will you be supporting the resolution?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Councilor Ward Russell, do you have a question
Yeah, I
or
think,
comment?
yeah, I'm, at least I'm a little confused, which is okay. Just confirm who owns who owns GIC 4?
Or
Did you hear-
that would have been Riverside Albert Fire Department.
So this money in these GICs can only be spent in those areas?
Yes, because Riverside Albert, I don't know the full history on it, but Riverside Albert Fire Department had done a good amount of fundraising to put siding on their building. And this is what the money they had put towards it. So this money could have been, I'd have to dig back in resolutions of Riverside Albert before my time, because it's been there for quite some time. They've been saving up to do some building updates. But some of the money would have been, like the rec center, would have been funded from the Harvey and Hopewell LSDs, as they contributed to the revenue of those two items.
So for instance, GIC number 1, 141,000, that is
Yeah.
only deemed for future work in Albert, Riverside Albert.
That goes towards Riverside Albert's projects under the CCBF.
So back up
You
to
should-
where you're withdrawing 27,968 from GIC for air packs.
Mhm.
Was that not
Yep.
a budgeted item in 2024?
No, they were an item that had come across my desk at the beginning of the year and I was not privy to it, but the fire chief said it had been approved by council.
We received an invoice in the middle of this year for air packs that were purchased in 2023. And I believe that's what the request is for. Is that correct, Julian?
Yes.
Or only Riverside Albert?
Correct.
And I do believe that was brought up to council as an expense and that they could go ahead because they had the money for it. It was no expense to the village.
I guess finally, I would like to see maybe an Excel spreadsheet just with all of them listed there. I find this very, very, there just seems to be a lot of transfers and I think we're just putting a lot of trust and hoping that they're going to the right spot. So,
I need to know whether you'll be supporting the resolution.
I will support this one.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor Earl.
Yeah, my last question is that, and this is really looking for clarification as a result of this conversation. Am I right? And I'm not sure who I'm asking. Anyone who can answer this, please. Is it right then to view these as, in a way, legacy amounts of unspent money that's earmarked specifically for specific either subunits or areas? For instance, some of them are a fire department, some's the rec center, some is community building fund, but Riverside Albert only. So that this is legacy stuff that will only be spent in the future in these areas. But that I believe, is it not right that starting this year, there's no further legacy amounts being earmarked for specific subunits, or are we?
There is no plans for further separation, no. Going forward, will be for Fundy Albert under my recommendations.
But not this money.
Not this.
Not
No,
this
this money, like other capital funds, will stay with the subunit that they come from. And will contribute to, for things like the fire departments and the rec center. These were attributed to by other LSDs along with the village.
So basically how I see this is that the money that the former village of Riverside Albert has put away and paid taxes on is going to benefit all of Fundy Albert for expenses in the future that we've put money aside for. That's how I see it.
It's how council just chooses to direct it.
Jillian, just a moment.
Yes.
This isn't a conversation between councillors here, so you asked to be recognized first. So Councillor Elderkin, if you want to speak, put your hand up, please. And Jillian, go ahead now.
Well, oh, okay. So I've kind of lost where we're at, but from what I had finished, Riverside Albert Capital, like the other capital accounts, stay with the former villages to be spent in the former villages. But things like the fire department and the rec center are to be spent within those items.
All right. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Earl, did that answer your question?
I think so.
And you will be. All right, thank you. I do have a question, and that it's a very simple question, is if the funds were just to be in a capital account, if the GICs were allowed to mature and they get dumped into a capital account, they would probably get a very minimal amount of interest. Am I correct in assuming that Riverside Albert, and maybe Councillor Elderkin, you might have some knowledge about this, that they adopted a practice of purchasing GICs as an investment tool that would generate more interest? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, so that's essentially, in my view, is the GICs are purchased, much like I would purchase a GIC personally, to generate a lot more interest than I get through the percent or less at the bank. So, all right, so that's correct. So I will be supporting the motion. Yes, Councillor Ward Russell.
What is the current interest rate that you are receiving on these?
They all vary. I don't have it open, but I know at the time it was more interest than what was the prime rate at the time. But I can go back and get the interest rates and bring them forward
And I just,
for
you know,
next meeting.
just for my own
Yep.
interest, is this normal what other municipalities do? They put everything into GIC?
Some municipalities do this, and you won't know the interest rate until you go to buy
I understand that,
the
but
GICs.
other municipalities put their.
It's
reserves
a
into
practice in
the
some
GIC.
municipalities.
In some.
Mayor, from that,
Yes, Councillor.
Julian, the reserve money is in Hillsborough. I'd like to see a number total on that when you have time. I know you don't have it right now, and that's fine. But that money is earmarked from before, so starting in January 1st, that money will be for Hillsborough only, am I correct?
Correct. Anything that was left over from Hillsborough will be used at the discretion of council towards that
Where is-
previous.
Where is that
Subunit.
reserve money? Is that in GICs or an open account?
No, it's in a capital fund account.
Drawing interest.
Yeah, on its own. Yeah, I had made a new agreement with the bank that's allowing more interest on all our savings accounts now versus before it was not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Last question.
Last question, please.
I assume that in order for any of these monies to be spent, it needs council approval?
Yes, she mentioned that a couple minutes ago.
Yes.
And if council wants to adopt a practice different than GICs, then that's council's prerogative to direct the treasurer and the CAO not to be purchasing any more GICs, to just have the money sitting in capital accounts. The challenge is you may not get as much interest by doing stuff like that. So, all right, any other questions or comments before we vote on the question? On the question, all in favor of the motion as presented, signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? The motion's adopted unanimously. Resolution number 2, which is general capital investments. The second motion is related to the creation of a Fundy Albert capital account. So if someone would be so kind as to read that. Yes, Councillor Coates.
Whereas Fundy Albert does not have a capital bank account, be it resolved that the council of Fundy Albert motion for the treasurer of Fundy Albert open a capital bank account for Fundy Albert.
So moved by Councillor Coates, seconded by Councillor Land. Any discussion on that question, on the motion, I should say? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
And just to be clear, what is the purpose of this account?
This purpose of this account is for all future Fundy Albert capital transfers for shared funds.
That answer your question, Council?
Yeah,
Okay, and will you be supporting the motion?
yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments before we go on the question? If not, all in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? The motion's carried unanimously. Item number 3, general capital investments. A resolution is required to address surplus funds in the 2024 Fundy Albert Operating Fund to Shared Capital Fund and Cashable GIC. So if somebody would be so kind as to read that motion, please. There's no motion. We'll move
I can
on.
read I don't apparently have the list of the final.
Yours
there
is fine from this point on. It was just one piece that was missing in the first motion. Apologies, Councillor Elderkin, that was my fault.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Whereas Fundy Albert General Operating has a projected surplus of $625,273 due to an uncompleted budget plans and additional 2022 surplus. Whereas the treasurer has recommended $150,000 be transferred to a shared capital fund. whereas the treasurer has recommended 172,345 be invested into a cashable GIC. Be it resolved that 150,000 be deposited into the Fundy Albert general capital account, and be it further resolved that the shared project / purchases amount of 172,345 be invested into a cashable GIC.
So moved by Councillor Elderton. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Earl. Any discussion on the motion? Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so let's just help bring clarity. The previous motion created a Fundy Albert capital account for which purpose it was described as for shared capital. Is that the same fund that is being referred to in this motion where the 150,000 is to be transferred to?
Correct.
I would recommend that we use consistent wording so it's obvious exactly what we're talking about here. That's my first point. Not sure. The second point is, or question or comment, is why would we invest some of it into the capital fund and some of it into a GIC? This goes back to much of what we were discussing in the very first resolution. I understand about earning interest. I get it.
Mhm.
But I don't understand why we're doing some into a GIC and some just into the fund. Maybe it's just the time horizon's different. I don't know. What I'm looking for an explanation.
So Treasurer, do you have an explanation, please?
Yes. So I put the separate amount of 172,345 to be invested in a cashable GIC. This is because it was only comes from surplus of the former villages of Alma, Hillsborough, and Riverside Albert from their shared transportation shortages. So this money would essentially should only be spent on shared items through transportation, be it trucks or roads or and other projects specified just for to be invested by those 3 subunits.
And the 150,000 would be to the shared capital.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Count.
But this goes back to the resolution, the first one we did, and we had a long discussion about these were legacy amounts that are earmarked for former subunit or specific purposes. And then I asked the question, going forward, are we going to be doing this? And the answer was no, but I think actually it is, the answer is depends. Sometimes the amounts are truly shared by everyone, in which they would go to the shared capital account. And other times the amounts are actually only shared among the 3 former villages, in which case they look like they go to a GIC, as opposed to maybe we need another fund. You see, this goes back to a comment I had earlier in the day where I had asked for a map of this stuff. It's very confusing to know really what is being earmarked for this money. We do have, in very cryptic terms in these resolutions, where they're going, but it's not really clear to anybody who's trying to follow this, should our treasurer not be available. You know, should we have a different treasurer at some point? I don't know how anybody would unravel all this stuff. That's just my comment. In principle, I think I would vote for or support this, but I just wonder if we're doing ourselves a disservice by not being clear.
Anyone else have any? Yep, just hold on, Treasurer, our Chief Administrative Officer first, please.
I was just going to say it's probably a fair observation, and that was one of the reasons why we did bring on that E6 company to help us sort through some of these things and see what best practices would be, how we can clean things up and make it easier moving forward. So any recommendations from them will be brought to council and we can have a discussion at that time.
Okay, Treasurer, you had a comment, please?
Yes, just, I know like John wants to see, or sorry, Counselor Arrow wants to see where that's funds were. We had made a list of recommendations and not all counselors agree with the recommendations. And for simplicity, we just had broke it down to a certain amount would go for shared and a certain amount would go for shared of the former villages. This allows us to bring projects to council and recommendations and for council to vote that we can use these funds towards those projects at a later time.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor, Deputy Mayor, you've indicated that you might support it.
Yeah, I would have preferred that our second resolution actually created two capital accounts. One would be called a shared
We're
capital.
not, we can't go back to the original
Okay.
one that's already been voted on.
That's right.
Yeah.
But so you understand that really what we did in resolution number 2 is we created a Fundy Albert shared capital account. And that really what we're trying to do in 3 is put some money there and some money into essentially what, for the lack of a better word, is shared among the former 3 villages capital account. We're doing it via buying a GIC, but without knowing where the GIC is actually attributed to, because it doesn't say, this motion does not say that that's actually attributed to the former 3 villages only.
You can make an amendment to the motion if you'd like, but if you would like to do that, it needs to be very specific by adding words only or removing words.
Yeah.
If you'd like to give that some thought while we look at other comments, I believe Councillor Ward Russell has a comment.
Yeah, so I did send some thoughts via email. So I'm still hoping I can get some answers to those tonight. I don't understand how these numbers are actually adding up. So if you've got a projected surplus of 625, 273, you subtract the 150,000 and you subtract the 172,000. That still leaves you with 302. Where is that $302,000 going to or being held at?
So
If you look further down on the next resolution, it addresses that extra funds that are there.
So
Of
that
that
motion, yeah, that motion reads 326,000 and you're
No,
suggesting.
it's 190.
Just hold on. It's not a back and forth between councillor and treasurer. You asked to be recognized first, please. Deputy Councillor Ward Russell, you still have the floor.
Okay, so you have 302,000 left over from those, and then you're, so 198, so now you've got 104,000 that's still floating.
Okay, treasurer, if you'd like to respond, please.
That'd be correct.
What are you doing with that 104,000?
That's for incidentals for year end, or if what's left to be pushed towards next year as a surplus on next year's budget.
Sorry, Chief Administrative Officer.
Also, Councillor Elderkin has a comment. I just wanted to ask, was this, we did present this information in a report previously, had we not? Jillian, where the amounts are going to?
Correct.
All right. Councillor Elderkin.
Hi, so yeah, just a couple questions from me, just for clarification.
If
And
it's a new, sorry, Councillor Elderkin, if it's a new question, we'll go back to Councillor Ward Russell to make sure her questions have been answered.
So,
So, no,
Okay.
hold on, Councillor Elderkin.
So yeah, I think this motion needs to be reshaped, reformed, everything. To me, if you talk about 625,000, you need to actually have every dollar mentioned in that. And I don't see that there at all. There's still, like I said, 104,000 that's still floating. I also would agree with Councillor Arrow that this third line where it says that you're recommending 172,345 to a cashable GIC, there's got to be mention in there that that is viable only to the 3 former villages only. And when you say you're gonna put $150,000 into a general capital account, what is that for? Are you going back to those 8 recommendations that we had seen a number of weeks ago? Is that your goal with that 150,000?
That is our recommendation. What council chooses to spend the funds on is up to council.
Okay, because I do believe that those 8 recommendations equal over 300,000. So
Some of
I
them
just-
would be part of the shared and some would be part of the non-shared.
yeah, I think there needs to be, I think this motion, anyway, no, I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Alderton.
If I could just ask a couple questions, it says the 625,273 is due to uncompleted budgeted plans, which an additional 2022 surplus. So the unbudgeted plans, I'm assuming, is from the 2024 things that we didn't get completed, correct?
Correct.
And then the additional from 2022.
Yes.
And that's
That'd be a
additional,
surplus.
right? And that's from all former villages or all the LSD areas too?
It's just for the Hillsborough surplus.
It's the Hillsborough surplus. And then my next question is, if this motion was to go through either today or Friday or whenever, if it gets modified, what happens if this is done and the surplus isn't as much, or there happens to be a deficit? What happens?
That's where I keep the extra 104,000. That's for incidentals that but I do not foresee a deficit.
Okay.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor?
Yes.
And will you be supporting the motion?
No, I would agree with Councillor Ward Russell that I think just the modification in the wording of this motion would help with the clarification for future reference.
Okay, anyone else with any questions? So I do, well, just, I'll speak first and.
Okay.
No, so if I understand correctly, you are recommending 150,000 be transferred to a shared capital account. 172,345 to be invested in a cashable GIC for transportation for the former 3 villages. And that ultimately there's a reference to the Hillsborough unbudgeted surplus, which is in addition to that. And then on top of that, there would be roughly 104,000, which I believe you were referring to your anticipated surplus for 2024 at year end, assuming everything works out to the way that you want. So that would add up to the 625,273. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for that reason, I will be supporting the motion. Anyone else? CS Deputy Mayor?
Okay, so the amounts that are in this budget or in this resolution. So the 625 is uncompleted work. And we did get an update at the November COW. I'm looking at it now. That had essentially the uncompleted work with unspent monies. But some of that money is clearly shared. As an example, TMR radios that weren't bought. And Alma Gazebo is an example. But when I'm adding those ones up that are truly shared, I'm not hitting 150. I'm getting a number less than that. Because the other amounts that are much larger seem to be more in line with the former villages, or there's some amounts that I think we already agreed never actually. Well, it's hard to know whether it was shared or not. How does the treasurer know which amounts were shared and which ones were former villages only of the uncompleted work?
So I'll let the treasurer respond.
The reason I know that some are shared and some are the former villages is because they're local costs only attributed by the former villages.
That may or may not respond to your question. Okay. Any other questions or comments before I call for the vote? And keep in mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if these transfers are not done, then these would form part of the 2024 surplus,
Correct.
which would then be carried forward 2 years hence to the 2026 general operating budget. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I believe Councillor Ward Russell, you had another question or comment?
Just add on to Councillor Arrow, if I add up what I would believe would be a shared cost out of those 8 recommendations, it only adds up to 130,000. So there's 20,000 that is. So.
I just calculated it and I'm getting the 150. I can create a list of what was shared and not shared and share it with you and Councillor Arrow.
So if the motion gets defeated, and we will call for the vote, if the motion gets defeated, then there will be an opportunity maybe on Friday to bring that up. And if it's not adopted, then it will form part of the 2024 surplus. And there are implications for that. I'm going to call an end to the questions and comments. There's enough doubt. People have indicated what they're going to vote, so I will call on the vote. All in favor of the motion as presented, signify by stating aye. So Councillor Coates is aye, Councillor Land. Against? Deputy Mayor Arrow?
Nay.
Nay. Councillor Ward Russell? No. And Councillor Elderkin?
Nay.
Nay. So no need for me to vote. I would have voted in favor, but the motion is defeated. So we'll move on. Item number 4. Or I believe, yeah, item number 4 is the Hillsborough unbudgeted surplus for 2022. The resolution is required.
Whereas,
Yes,
If I
Deputy
may.
Mayor, sorry, Councillor Land, sorry.
whereas the former village and also budgeted surplus was 127,701. Whereas the former village at Hillsborough's actual surplus was 326,203. Whereas the balance is required to accounted for in 2024 and cannot be forwarded to 2025 budget. Whereas the treasurer has recommended the surplus be invested in the capital GIC for arena capital upgrades. Be it resolved that 198,502 be invested into a cash flow GIC for arena capital upgrades.
So moved by Councillor Land. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Coates. Any discussion on the motion? So if I understand correctly, this was the projected 2022 surplus for Hillsborough ended up being more than anticipated. Is that
More than
correct?
more than what Baker Tilly had initially had gave us.
Reported. So that's now in our 2024 budget, correct?
Correct.
And it has to be addressed. Yes, that Council Land.
Is there any other capital upgrades in Hillsborough that they may go towards other than the arena? Or is that just something you picked out?
It was a recommendation I have on mine. With the other funding we can get, we could do probably about around $1 million worth of work to the arena and at zero extra cost to the municipality.
It's a recommendation only, Council. Yeah.
Because the pool also has somewhat of an upgrade that needs to be done to it, and I don't know if administration is talking about that or not. And if it is, this money could be shared to both. That's all I was wondering.
Yeah, which is correct. As I said, it's council's prerogative.
Yeah.
To spend that funding.
But if it was into a cash flow GIC for the arena capital upgrades, that's what it's for only,
No,
correct?
it's a recommendation. So if you want it into something called something other, then you can do that. Deputy Mayor.
I don't know why sometimes we're dumping them into GICs and other times we're putting it into just a general capital account that gives us all the flexibility. I understand about earning interest. There's got to be a better way. I know the treasurer just mentioned she's tried to negotiate or did negotiate better interest rates for our general accounts. It just seems like that we talked about in our resolution 1 how the GICs were for legacy items, but we're moving forward here now. We're trying to at least. And yet we're perpetuating the GIC concept in the last 2 resolutions. I just don't know what we're doing here. In a way, I'm agreeing with Deputy or Councillor Lamb there that we're agreeing that we want to move this into an area that we can use it to upgrade some of our existing infrastructure, whether it's the arena or the pool or whatever else. But I would support it, but I think we need a better strategy moving forward that's at least that we can understand why we're doing it some ways, sometimes, and other ways, other times.
Yeah. Point. So Council Land, I need to know whether you'll be supporting this more.
I'll support this on that fact that we can move it around. That's because it seems to be conflicting. The motion before had different place to put the money. Now we're talking about just pass the account for the arenas, but I want to make sure that money can't be moved further than.
So treasurer, are we allowed to, if we identify it, are we allowed to use it for other than the arena?
Essentially, you really can't earmark it. We can earmark it for our wanted use, but according to community finance in the past, they said we essentially, if we wanted to use it for something else, we could, as long as it remained in the general or operating.
Sorry, but that doesn't make sense to me.
No.
If it's in the general operating account, then it's not in a cashable GIC.
It's a general operating funds is how it was invested from, so it can remain in general operating. It's essentially, it can be used in anything general, it just cannot be used for utility.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay,
I'll be supporting.
all right, thank you. Councillor Ward Russell.
So the 127,701, where was that seen in our 2024 budget? Was that, what line item was that?
That would have been a part of the surplus.
And was that just specific to Hillsborough, or is that overall shared?
That was specific to Hillsborough.
And so if I take 326 is what the actual surplus was, subtract the 127 and the 198, I still don't get 326.
Yes.
You do?
If you take 127,701 from 326,203, you get 198,502.
So
That one balances.
that one does bounce, okay. So just curiosity, was the other surpluses in 2022, was that a shared or?
That was specific to Hillsborough.
No, but let's say, I'm not sure if Riverside Albert had a surplus or not. Was there a surplus out of Riverside Albert from 2022?
Yes, but it was accounted for in budget. When we completed budget last year, the surplus that Baker Tilly gave us was 127,701. But upon the completion of the Hillsborough financials, their surplus was 326,203.
Which is extra.
Yes.
Do we
No
know
other
roughly-
subunits had a difference in their surpluses.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Earl.
Is there a simple answer of why there was such a 200,000 almost or $198,000 additional find of a surplus? How was that missed?
I
I
am
don't know
not
if our
sure.
treasurer-
That'd be a question for the auditors that completed the audit.
Or the treasurer of Hillsborough at the time,
Pardon me?
or the treasurer of Hillsborough at the time. Like, that wasn't our treasurer currently. That would have had that information at that year.
So it's a previously unreported surplus, and now we have to account
Yeah,
for
yeah.
it. And she's recommending that
Yeah.
198,502 be invested in cashable GIC. All right, any other questions?
The only other thing I want to add is that I would disagree that it's specific for the arena. I think that, you know, if I could make an amendment,
We've already addressed that. Well, if you want to make an amendment, please be specific in terms of remove Hillsborough Arena and
so if you feel comfortable as is, you do.
let's not have the conversation. Let's make the amendment first, then we vote on the amendment.
No, there's no need for an amendment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone ready on the question? All in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. Well, thank you. Item number 5, Hillsborough Utility Capital Investment. A resolution is required to transfer surplus funds from the 2024 Hillsborough Utility into a capital account reserved for water exploration. If somebody would be so kind as to read that, please.
Whereas the amount budgeted for water exploration for phase 1 was not fully used in 2024, whereas Hillsborough Utility has reached the maximum allowable amount in an operating reserve. Whereas Hillsborough Utility has an estimated surplus of $122,215. Whereas the treasurer has recommended $75,000 of that surplus be transferred to capital for water exploration phase 2. Be it resolved that $75,000 be transferred to Hillsborough Utility capital account.
So moved by Councillor Land. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Coates. Seconded by Councillor Coates. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I got a question. You say you got the maximum allowable amount in the operating reserve, which is, how large of amount is that?
It can be 5% of the utility budget expenses of the previous year. And that where we are amalgamated with Fundy Albert, that also includes the amounts for Riverside Albert and Alma Utility.
No, I've asked you this question before, but a share of $47,215 that you're going to keep in the account for operating on a day-to-day basis. But do you not get money coming in per month? Something arises, you should have that money. All I'm saying is I think the whole amount should go into the capital account. And I'd be willing to make a resolution.
I believe she said that we can't put any more.
Maxed out.
It's maxed out. No.
No, I mean the 75,000 that the treasurer over.
The trouble is phase 2 is not what we're trying to accomplish. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is the actual drilling. Phase 2 is the actual building of the system.
Yeah.
Phase 1 is the water exploration. So if by putting it into phase 2,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, Treasurer, but phase 2 is not phase 1, correct?
Correct.
So if we put it in for phase 2, just as an example, we're going to phase 2 the Alma water,
Yep.
which is not phase 1. Phase 1 was the drilling and exploration. Phase 2 is the actual construction of the project.
Okay.
So if we put it into phase 2, she's putting it into phase 2 because we can't do anything else with it.
Understood.
No, but you were asking, sorry, but
Yeah, no,
He's saying put it all into
Yeah.
phase 2, then we would have nothing for phase 1. That's that we've got to have funding available in phase 1.
I don't know.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Ward Russell?
Just for clarity, so more expenses being incurred for phase 1?
We haven't started phase 1. But we've been charging increased water rates for 2 years. So funding is building.
Okay,
We've got to do something with those funds.
so you're saying now that you want to take those access funds and put it into phase 2?
Some of them into phase 2, some of it will be around for phase 1 as well. Because we still have to do phase 1 in order to get to phase 2. I need to know how, Councillor Land, are you in favor of the motion?
I'll be in favor of this, yes.
Deputy Mayor,
yeah, I am, I think, because in principle, I think I understand what's going on, but I'm a bit with Councillor Land here that I don't really understand why you're not transferring it all, and here's why. where we're talking about transferring it to is a utility capital account.
Mhm.
That in itself doesn't earmark whether it's for phase one or for phase two. It's saying, put it over there in a capital account. Now, when you need to spend money in either phase one or phase two, you can transfer the money back.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Treasurer, but I believe if you're in a capital account, you can't use it in general operating?
That'd be correct. For phase one, it's not considered capital until we pass the 72-hour pump test. So once we pass that, we can use capital funds towards that project. That's why it's stipulated as exploration for phase two, where we couldn't put the money aside for phase one in an operating reserve where it could be used. I recommend it. We still push it towards that project to lower the cost of capital once we get to that phase two for the Hillsburg utility users.
Thank you.
And you're allowed to do that? You're allowed, because if what I just heard is phase one isn't really considered capital because it's like exploration, but you're allowed to transfer unused phase one to a capital?
Oh, you're allowed to transfer operating funds into a capital account. That's,
So
and this is,
You can't do it backwards, though.
no, what she's saying is you
Can't
can't,
do it backwards.
no, you should not be doing. And it's just to avoid, to avoid it all going into, well, we've expired the maximum
Of the
in the
operating
operating,
reserve.
so we wouldn't be able to do anything with it.
Yeah, right, okay. Mhm. All right, I support
Okay,
it.
so you'll be supporting it?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Councillor Elderkin, did you have anything?
No.
No? Okay. Everyone ready for the question? On the question, on the motion, all in favor of the motion as presented, signify by stating aye.
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 Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimous. Item number 6, which is the Riverside Albert Water Treatment Plant upgrades. Resolution is required to authorize the treasurer to utilize general operating funds to pay invoices pending the receipt of the 2023 Fundy Albert audited financials. Is that a correct summary?
That'd be correct.
If someone would be so kind as to read that, please.
Whereas Fundy Albert's bank will not release interim funding without Fundy Albert's 2023 financial, whereas the Fundy Albert 2023 financials are delayed, whereas we've received estimate invoice of $526,500 from a contractor completing the Riverside Albert water treatment plant upgrades, whereas funding for said project will be reimbursed from the Regional Development Corporation at 93.33% within a month of paying the invoice. Whereas Riverside Albert Utility has sufficient funds for Fundy Albert's portion of 6.67%. Whereas Fundy Albert General Operating has sufficient funds to loan the Riverside Albert Utility until reimbursement is received. Be it resolved, the council authorized the treasurer to use $491,382.45 from the general operating fund to compensate the contractor and to refund the general operating until reimbursement from the Regional Development Corporation.
So moved by Councillor Elderkin. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Land. Any discussion on the motion?
So just for clarification, in layman's terms, I'm understanding the bill is in. We're looking for us to pay it while we wait for the financials to get done, and then the Fundy Albert will be reimbursed the amount that they lent to pay the bill.
We haven't received the invoice yet, but the project is, if Ian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is at the end and we should anticipate an invoice at any time.
And we're hoping to get it on our year end for 2024, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, so in principle, I'm supporting this, but I'm just trying to figure out where the money's coming from, and it's the 491,000 that I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from, because it's coming from the general operating. It says right there. But on our resolution number 3 that we did, it was talking about our surplus, projected surplus for this year of 625. We just transferred roughly 320 out of that. That left 300.
So maybe treasurer, I think what Deputy Mayor Arrow was talking about is a difference between anticipated surplus funds and what monies we currently have sitting in our accounts. Is that
There's-
correct?
There is, for both those amounts plus operating, there
Yeah,
is
so-
enough funds in our account.
There's cash flows there.
Yeah, that's what
The
this
cash
is
flow's
saying.
there.
Yeah, the cash flows there to do that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well,
Mr.
only
Mayor?
because, you know, a lot of things were crunched because we're coming right to the end of the year end.
Mhm.
So it's still gonna work?
That's
guess so.
that's what we're being told.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Council Land.
Treasurer, if I may, on the 526,500 is the total, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And if you get 93% of that, 0.33 on invoice, and Riverside Albert picks up the other 6.67, if you do the percentages, we did a motion earlier for 35,833. I get a different number.
Through HST.
There'd be net HST there'd be HST portions in there.
That's why it's over.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Council Lord Russell.
Yeah, so as much as I understand the need and the want to approve this, but I don't like the idea where it's an estimated invoice. We should not be making motions on an estimated invoice. So what if that estimated invoice comes at 527? Then all those numbers have been changed. So unless I see an official invoice, I will not be supporting this.
Right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? And I do have a question. And you said that, so do we have to wait until our audited financials are available before RDC would reimburse us?
No,
So in other words, this is just a quick pay the invoice, 93%, 93.33% would come back into our account. We don't have to have the interim financing for that. So we have the ability to fund it from cash flow. Correct? Yes, Council Land,
One more last question. So we do not have a bill for this. It's an estimate.
not yet. But it's likely the result of the contract. Yeah, so these are contracted amounts.
We did not go over the estimated amount. We just had a project meeting to close it off today. And it's gonna come in at exactly what the tender went out as,
So it's locked in basically.
pretty much.
We don't know that though.
That's what we're being told, is it will be coming in at the tendered amount. That's what our
So the
chief
tentative
administrator.
amount is 526 filed.
Correct.
Any other questions? So I will call for a vote on the motion. All in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
Opposed, if any. Noted that Councillor Ward Russell votes nay, I will vote in favor, so the motion is adopted. Thank you. So that concludes the matters for year-end financial resolution. So we'll move on to item number 5, which is a motion related to the Alma Municipal Well Project. A resolution is required, so I would ask someone to read that motion, please.
Yes, I will. Whereas Fundy Albert released a tender number NB0N-MFA-18073 seeking proposals from qualified, experienced firms to construct a new municipal well and related infrastructure, Phase 2A. And whereas a fair tender process was initiated on New Brunswick Opportunities Network, the tender was properly advertised. Bids were received from 7 companies and were reviewed and evaluated by Englobe, who were contracted by Fundy Albert to manage the project. And whereas the lowest complete tender bid was Camille Leger Limited for the amount of $6,918,078, including HST. Be it resolved that Council of Fundy Albert authorize the mayor and clerk to award tender number MFA-18073 to Camille Leger Limited for the amount of $6,918,078, including HST.
So moved by Deputy Mayor Arrow. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Council Land. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Council Coates.
Two things, and it says related infrastructure, phase 2, what's that? 2A.
The Alma project was again split up into phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was the exploration. Phase 2 is then split into two. I'm not sure why it was done that way, but it is a bit complicated. 2A is the construction of the new well. 2B is yet to be. It's still undecided what we will be doing as a second part of that project. There's different options available. It could be the lagoon, it could be water going further up and increase in the infrastructure. So we are only awarding the 2A part of the project.
Next question, second. On the tenders, there's 4 corrected mathematical errors. Who caught that?
That was Englobe.
Okay.
And I know I'm going to let our director of operations, because he was at the tender opening.
Start tender opening. What they do is they open up the tenders on the table, they quickly add them all up by calculator, and these people just sat there typing in. It is then provisionally awarded to the lowest bidder, not awarded, but the lowest bidder is given the go ahead. They then have 1 week to check the sums. Obviously, fingers hit the wrong buttons and that, so there's a few figures wrong here and there, not massively. And then the tender package had to be complete as well. So despite this was the lowest bid, they've come through really well. Had their tender package not been complete, we'd have then gone up to the next one up the line that had it been tender.
I'm in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I will support this, but I'd like to make a request and also a clarification on something. So it is clear, and our Chief Administrative Officer just mentioned that this is for infrastructure related to phase 2A. What the first point that I'd like to make is that this amount that we're about to approve as council is a huge amount, right? This is more than an entire year of the Fundy Albert budget. It's more than half of the total project cost. So it's a significant amount. It's a significant milestone. And I believe that we should have a formal in-person update from Englobe on this project as soon as possible. I would suggest either the next regular council meeting or the next committee of the whole, just to provide us from them an update of where we're at. I did read their letter. There's some detail there, but just how's everything going? What are we imagining? And it's this business about phase 2A and phase 2B. You see, the phase 2A that we're actually approving an amount here for is not the full original phase 2A. The original phase 2A was to include not just the new wells, but anything related to the existing distribution system. It wasn't just the expansion of the system. But in fact, the phase 2A that's being approved here does not include anything to do with anything above the booster station or even the booster station itself on School Street. Because there were complications with the booster station, it was removed from phase 2A. And so I'm hoping, like I noticed in the letter from Englobe, that they're saying that this amount is within the original project plan. But I would like to have an update in person from Englobe about what is going on here. How is everything going good? What about the booster station? How does that affect these amounts? And even as we project to the completion of the project, is everything looking good for the 12.2, 12.3? I think we owe it to ourselves to have that sooner than later.
Okay.
But I'm glad that we're making headway here.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments? So if not, I will call for a vote on the motion. All in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 6, budget deliberation principles. So I believe Councillor Ward Russell, you wanted to present on that?
I just want to start the conversation off with, I know that Mayor Rochon, you sent an email out with, not really sure how Friday's meeting was going to move forward and how the agenda was going to be done. So I'd like to have discussion with what your goals on Friday actually are. And then there's a few things that we've received that is still not sitting well with me that I would like to bring up as well.
You'd like to bring them up today, or do you like to bring them up on Friday? Because the budget deliberations are on Friday.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm wondering is I'm trying to give the administration some time. I know that we've got Christmas coming up in the next few days, but in order for us to move forward on Friday, I think, there's things that just are just off a little bit within the budget that was sent around today.
So you're asking what my expectations are? My expectations are very simple. We either approve the budget on Friday or we don't. If we don't, then there are some implications for the municipality. I think the provincial government has been very clear on that. So those numbers are going to be provided to us. My suggestion is that we avoid going through the budget again, one line by one line. And if the direction from this council is to trim a specific amount, then we leave that to, and we're not doing that at this meeting, is to trim a certain amount from that budget to end at an end goal. Then that on Friday, at the beginning of the meeting, that administration be given that direction to do that. And then we take a break, and then they're provided an opportunity to come back with new numbers. I think it's ill-advised to be going back and starting to take a look at $5,000 at a time. It's an absolute waste of time in my view. And it's a poor use of administration's time to do that. So those are my expectations.
Can you say that again? Sorry, you plan on administration will be taking a break and coming back with?
My suggestion, council can approach it. If you want to go through line by line, I'm not going to stand in your way. However, we are, like, if you want to be here on all weekend, then I suggest you might want to avoid, unless you want to be here all weekend, then I suggest you avoid that approach. We've already gone through the budget 2 or 3 times. This will be 15 hours invested in this process, and we're still not where some folks would like us to be. So my suggestion would be, right now, we haven't seen the final numbers. As I understand it, the rate increases have changed significantly. Once those are provided to council, then council have an opportunity to look at those and come on Friday with a plan to either approve the budget as presented or make some proposed changes. But I would suggest you avoid a situation where you start to go through the budget line by line again. I'll let our Chief Administrative Officer speak. Maybe you have a different.
We did provide a report this morning that had the final budget numbers.
So those were provided to council members. So those are an opportunity for you, but ultimately 2 things will happen. We either approve the budget or we don't. And at which point, Department of Environment and Local Government will approve whatever's in the report.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying my best to be able to approve this budget. But with the information that we currently have, I cannot. So I'm wondering, when can I give, when can we have that discussion? If you're not going to have it, we're not having it today on Friday morning, does that give us enough time? Or do we, I don't know. I was looking for advice because
I don't know what council wants. I don't know how much time.
Yeah.
Well, let's not get into an argument. This is not what this purpose of this meeting is, not budget deliberation, and we're not going there. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so if I understood correctly, this agenda item was just to sort of talk about fundamentals or principles about what we're going to do. Unfortunately, up until now, in all our budget deliberations that we've had in public, this is my view at least, the fundamental questions we haven't really talked about, and yet each iteration of the budget is somewhat, or has been somewhat radically different than the others on two specific points. One is that how many unique tax rates are we going to have? So the current proposal we received today and the last one on Thursday, there's only two separate tax rates. As you know, this year was at 4? There were 5? 4. 5.
No, it's only 4 this year.
I'm sorry.
So we started with 8. This year we're 4. The current proposal, but it wasn't always the proposal, but the current proposal, like, I mean, for 2025, it's changed, but now it's 2. Okay. We've not debated as a council this point, and it's fundamental because it will drive everything else. So I'm wondering when we're going to do that. Linked to that is what we have in the most recent versions of the budget proposal, but not the first one or the first few, is that now all of the former 3 villages' expenses essentially are shared between the 3 of us. The first iterations and this year and last year, they weren't. They were separate. Now the most current version is based on the fundamental principle that all the 3 villages, those amounts are shared equally according to tax base ratio. And lastly, we've never really got to the bottom of what's the total budget increase that we're prepared to sell to the community.
Mhm.
Meaning, and if the fundamental dividing line is it going to be the same as or less or more than how much our tax base went up in 2025, which is, I believe, 12.4%. Those 3 fundamental points in a way drive the entire budget, and yet we've never debated among council those points.
I'll disagree with you. I'll disagree with you on the first point that we've never debated whether we should collapse into rates. I believe you've been quite clear. You wanted to see one, you're actually
I do.
for one rate straight across. But it's not a one person, it's not my decision to make, it's not your decision to make. It's this council's decision. Now, there have been, like I said, we've got 12 hours into this thing and somebody could have it'll be 15, I believe.
Sorry, I apologize.
It'll be 15 once we hit Friday if we have 3 hours invested in it. It's certainly council's prerogative to do that during budget deliberations to say we either want or we don't want or blended tax rates. We've heard from residents who have said they're opposed to a blended tax rate, but this council has not pronounced itself. And that doesn't mean that you haven't had the opportunity, Deputy Mayor. It means that council has not pronounced itself on that issue. So if you want to do that as a starting point, and we're not doing it today, that's not the purpose of this, it's direction that needs to be provided, then we can do that as a starting point or something to consider when we start those discussions on Friday. Well, like I said, it's a principle. You say that it's an important principle, and I don't disagree with you. But to suggest that we've never talked about it, I don't think is correct.
Well, the only time I believe we talked about it actually was a private meeting before we started the budget deliberations. It was in this room.
If we go back and we listen to the video, it's been mentioned several times about blended tax rates. Nobody has said I'm opposed to it. No one has really said I'm for it. But it's an unfair statement to say that it's never been discussed.
I don't believe that it's been discussed to the extent that you think it has.
That's your opinion. You're entitled to your opinion.
We'll have the discussion Friday morning first thing. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
When I come Friday morning,
Mhm.
I'll have something for administration to chew on.
Now,
First, tax rates, who gets what, where, and how I kind of see that thing going forward.
Okay. So Councillor Ward Russell, you asked what my expectation is. My expectations are very simple. I would like to see, I would like to see us agree on something that we could adopt a resolution to approve a budget amount. And it will be blank when we walk in to approve a budget amount. And at the end of the day, if we don't approve an amount, then the motion will not get adopted. And then we walk away from the table, knowing that we've done our absolute best to set a budget, but we will have seen by our municipality, by our constituents, have not met our requirements. And it is a requirement of ours is to approve a budget. Does that answer your question? Maybe not, but it's the best answer I can give you today. All right? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
The only other comment that I would make, this would be sort of new then, is only today, with the submission received from administration, am I finally seeing the utility rates for a unit.
Mhm.
Okay. In my quick look, it looks like it's an increase of at least more than 10%. So I think we need to, as part of so we've, up until all our budget deliberations that we've had, and I don't yet know, by the way, Hillsborough, how much it is. I believe it's 10% for more for Alma, and I believe it's maybe even 15% for Riverside Albert. I would ask that we have, because we've not had any discussion or debate or deliberation about the utility budget up until now, we've only really received it, that we need to have that explained to us.
Yeah, and it would form part of the discussion. I suspect, I know why there are some increases. As an example, for the community of Alma, phase 2 of the new water exploration project is probably contributing to that, which would contribute to ongoing costs. In the community of Riverside Albert, they've just had a water treatment plant upgrade, so I suspect that's contributed to the increased rates. I don't know, like, I haven't really paid much attention.
Looks like we haven't actually had it,
Yeah,
really.
Right, so we will have an opportunity to ask questions on Friday. And it'll be an opportunity for administration to answer some questions, keeping in mind that, you know, they're dealing with the folks who actually are in the business of operating the utility and know what the costs are, including the cost of our extra water operator. I believe is probably a significant increase to that cost.
And repairs to all of the systems. There's
Yeah.
ongoing work on
Right,
a lot of the systems. as
They
well.
require,
And the last thing that I know a number of us are looking for kind of elaboration on that links the two budgets together. The general operating and the utility are linked together by these transfers between the two. And the transfers are to do with, I believe, mostly people and movable assets. But I don't know for certain. This, we need to have a comprehensive explanation on Friday about that, because it's not easy to follow what really is going on.
right. And that's fair. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes,
One thing
Councilor.
that I would like to see again, if it's possible for Friday, is the way that we've been looking at salaries. The way that it was showed today is a brand new spreadsheet, and that is even harder to follow. So I like to go back and look at what we actually seen with regards to salary, the first number of times. Let's squash this one and go back to what we've actually seen in the past.
Okay. Any other comments?
I have one comment, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
In the event, I heard the discussion that if this doesn't get approved on Friday, can it not be approved on Monday? If there's some things that administration has to go back, can we not come back on Monday to approve it?
I'll let administration respond to that.
Yeah, I believe as long as the information is in the portal by the 31st, and I'll ask our treasurer how much time you need leading into that. Half a day?
It all
Day?
depends on the changes that are requested. If there anything that's changed on part of the utility transfer, that does take a lengthy amount of time. But it should, if it's just initial cuts on certain lines, doesn't take very long.
Yeah, my fear is by doing it all on Friday, like you suggested, go away and then come back, is that sometimes doesn't allow respect to our treasurer and to our administration team to review everything clearly before it's approved. I would sooner see them take the time they need to make the necessary changes, get it back out and have another meeting to approve it. That's
So you're
just my 2 cents worth.
So you're suggesting meeting again early the following week instead of trying to get everything done on Friday,
If necessary.
if necessary.
Correct. That would be I think it's only fair to our administration team that they take what deliberations happen and go back and make the adjustments.
All right, thank you. All right, Councillor Coates, do you have something to say?
No.
No? Okay. So that concludes all the business we have today. I'll accept a motion to adjourn. So moved by Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much, everybody. So the meeting's adjourned.